They all laughed. And then there was only silence. The kind of silence that makes even the school clock stop ticking. No one expected a poor kid in worn-out clothes to stand up against the strictest teacher in the entire school. But that day changed everything. Not just for him, but for an entire classroom of witnesses. Before I continue, if stories like this inspire you, subscribe to the channel now, so you don't miss the next ones. I still remember it like it was yesterday. The smell of chalk dust hanging in the air of that 5th grade classroom. The uncomfortable wooden chairs that creaked with every movement, and the nervous energy that filled the room whenever Mr. Peterson walked in. He was the kind of teacher students whispered about in hallways. Tall, always dressed in perfectly pressed suits, with a voice that never needed a microphone to silence 40 rowdy kids. It was early October in a small town outside of Boston. The leaves were turning golden outside our classroom window, but inside the atmosphere was anything but warm. Our school was in one of those neighborhoods where you could tell exactly who came from money and who didn't, just by looking at their lunch boxes or winter coats. Jamie sat in the back corner, small for his age, with clothes that were always a little too big or a little too small, never quite right. You could tell they were hand-me-downs or thrift store finds. His sneakers were held together with duct tape on one side, and his backpack had been repaired so many times it was more patch than original material. But despite all that, Jamie always had a smile ready, a genuine one that reached his eyes, not the fake kind that some of us had mastered for school photos. 2 rows ahead of Jamie sat Noah. Noah was different from Jamie in almost every way possible. While Jamie was small and quiet, Noah had a stutter that made every class participation a potential nightmare. His parents had money. His dad was some kind of executive at a tech company, but no amount of speech therapy sessions seemed to help with that stutter. And in a classroom ruled by Mr. Peterson, a stutter was like having a target on your back. I sat between them, observing everything, saying little. That's how I've always been. Watching, noticing things that others miss. Like how Jamie always saved half his lunch for Noah on days when the cafeteria served something Noah's allergies wouldn't allow, or how Noah would silently slide completed math worksheets onto Jamie's desk when Mr. Peterson wasn't looking. They had formed their own quiet alliance of outsiders. That particular Tuesday started like any other. Mr. Peterson strode in at exactly 8:30 a.m., his leather shoes clicking against the linoleum floor like a countdown. We all straightened in our seats, a Pavlovian response after 2 months under his rule. "Pop quiz," he announced, and the collective groan was silenced by a single raised eyebrow. "American Revolution. 10 questions. You have 15 minutes. The rustle of papers being passed back, the clatter of pencils being retrieved from desks, the quiet panic that settled over the room. All normal. Until question 7. Noah." Mr. Peterson's voice cut through the concentrated silence. "Since you seem to be staring out the window instead of at your paper, perhaps you'd like to answer question 7 for the class." We all knew what this was. Not a genuine request, but a public shaming disguised as educational opportunity. Noah's face flushed red instantly, his eyes darting down to the quiz he'd barely started. What year did the B Boston?" he began, the stutter worse under pressure, each attempted word causing his face to redden further. "We don't have all day, Noah," Mr. Peterson said, checking his watch dramatically. "The Boston Tea Party. Basic American history. Something every 5th grader should know." Noah's hands were trembling now. 1770 what, Noah? "At this rate, we'll be here until the next American Revolution." A few kids laughed. The nervous kind of laugh that happens when you're relieved you're not the target. I watched Noah's eyes begin to glisten with unshed tears, his shoulders hunching forward as if trying to make himself smaller, invisible. 70? Oh, for heaven's sake, Mr. Peterson sighed, the exaggerated kind that adults use when they want to make sure you know just how disappointed they are. "This is 5th grade material. Your father's money might buy you nice clothes and that fancy watch, but it clearly can't buy basic knowledge or the ability to speak properly." The room went completely still. We'd all witnessed Mr. Peterson's strictness before, but this crossed a line. Still, no one moved. No one spoke. Not even me. We were just kids after all, and he was the authority figure. And then, from the back corner came the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. "December 16th, 1773. The voice was clear, unwavering, and didn't belong to Noah. All heads turned to see Jamie standing, his second-hand sweater hanging loose on his thin frame, but his posture straighter than I'd ever seen it. "Excuse me?" Mr. Peterson's voice was dangerously quiet. "The answer is December 16th, 1773, Jamie repeated, looking directly at Mr. Peterson. "And Noah knows that. He just has trouble saying it sometimes." If the silence before was uncomfortable, this one was electrifying. Jamie had never spoken up in class before, not once in the 2 months since school started. Mr. Peterson's face darkened. "Sit down, Jamie. This doesn't concern you." But Jamie didn't sit. Instead, he took a step forward. "It does concern me when you make fun of someone for something they can't help." I remember thinking how different Jamie looked in that moment. The same worn clothes, the same taped-up sneakers, but something had changed. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, revealing a completely different person behind those usually quiet eyes. "One more word," Mr. Peterson warned, "and you'll be spending the next month in detention." Jamie took another step. "My dad stutters too," he said, his voice somehow getting stronger rather than weaker. "He's the smartest person I know, but people judge him before he can finish a sentence. Just like you're judging Noah. If this story has touched you so far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because there are other real and emotional stories you can't miss." The tension in the room was building with every word, with every step Jamie took. Mr. Peterson's face had transitioned from annoyed to furious. His knuckles were white around the pen he was holding. "That's quite enough, both of you. Principal's office. Now." But Jamie didn't move toward the door. Instead, he looked around at all of us, at 30 pairs of eyes watching in stunned silence, before landing on Noah, who looked equally shocked. "No," Jamie said simply. It was just one word, but it landed like a bomb in our classroom. No student had ever directly defied Mr. Peterson before. "What did you just say to me?" Mr. Peterson's voice was barely above a whisper now, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd shouted. "I said no." Jamie's voice remained steady. "Noah didn't do anything wrong. He was trying to answer your question. I'm not going to the principal's office for standing up for my friend, and he shouldn't go for having a stutter." Mr. Peterson moved so quickly that several of us gasped. Within seconds, he was looming over Jamie, using his height to intimidate. "You think because you've had a difficult life you get to disrespect teachers? You think your circumstances give you special permission to disrupt my classroom?" I expected Jamie to back down then. Anyone would have. But what happened next changed everything. Jamie didn't step back. He didn't lower his eyes. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The movement was so unexpected that even Mr. Peterson seemed momentarily confused. "My circumstances don't give me special permission for anything," Jamie said, unfolding the paper carefully. "But they did teach me something you might not know about." "And what exactly is that?" Mr. Peterson's tone was mocking now. "Empathy," Jamie answered, and then he held up the paper for Mr. Peterson to see. From where I sat, I couldn't make out what was on it, but whatever it was made Mr. Peterson's face change completely. The color drained away, replaced by an expression I'd never seen on him before. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "My dad works as a night janitor at the community college," Jamie said. "The same college where you take night classes to finish your teaching degree." A murmur went through the classroom. None of us had known Mr. Peterson wasn't a fully qualified teacher yet. "I've seen you there," Jamie continued. "My dad brings me sometimes when he can't find a sitter. I've seen you practicing your presentations in empty classrooms. I've seen how your hands shake. I've heard you stutter when you think no one's listening." Mr. Peterson took a step back, the paper still in Jamie's extended hand. I craned my neck, finally able to see what it was. A photograph. A photograph of Mr. Peterson standing in front of what looked like a small college classroom. Mid-sentence, fear evident on his face. "You," Mr. Peterson started, then stopped, his voice catching, and just for a moment I heard it, the faintest hint of a stutter. "I wasn't going to tell anyone," Jamie said, his voice softer now. "I know what it's like to be afraid of what people might think. My dad says everyone's fighting a battle others can't see." The classroom was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking again. Mr. Peterson stared at Jamie for what felt like forever, then at the photograph, then at Noah, who was watching the whole scene unfold with wide eyes. When Mr. Peterson finally spoke. His voice was different, stripped of its usual authority and condescension, almost human. "May I have that, please?" he asked, gesturing to the photograph. Jamie folded it carefully and handed it over. "I didn't make copies," he said, "and I won't tell anyone. But please don't make fun of Noah anymore, or anyone else." Mr. Peterson took the photo and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He cleared his throat once, twice. Then he turned to Noah. "I apologize, Noah," he said, the words sounding strange coming from him. "Your answer was, that is, you were on the right track. December 16th, 1773 is correct." He turned back to face the entire class, his composure visibly returning, but something fundamental had shifted. "Everyone, continue with your quizzes. You have 10 more minutes." He walked back to his desk without another word. Jamie returned to his seat. Noah wiped his eyes quickly with his sleeve, then shot Jamie a look of such pure gratitude it made my throat tight just witnessing it. As we all bent over our papers again, I couldn't focus on the American Revolution. All I could think about was what I'd just witnessed. How someone as small and seemingly powerless as Jamie had stood up not just to authority, but to injustice. How he'd defended his friend without throwing a single punch or saying a single cruel word. How he'd somehow managed to be both fierce and compassionate at the same time. The rest of the quiz period passed in a blur. When the bell rang, Mr. Peterson collected our papers without making eye contact with anyone. As we filed out for recess, I noticed him stop Jamie at the door. I lingered, pretending to tie my shoe, straining to hear their conversation. "Why did you do that?" Mr. Peterson asked quietly. "You could have used that photo differently. You could have shown it to the principal or the other students." Jamie shrugged, adjusting his worn backpack strap. "Because that's not who I want to be," he said simply. "And I think maybe it's not who you want to be either." Mr. Peterson stood there for a long moment, studying Jamie's face as if seeing him for the first time. Then with a slight nod, he stepped aside and let Jamie join the others for recess. I followed Jamie outside, burning with questions. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of younger kids on the playground. Jamie headed straight for the far corner of the yard, where Noah was sitting alone on a bench, head down, kicking at the gravel. "Hey," Jamie said, sliding onto the bench beside him. Noah looked up, his eyes still red-rimmed. How did you do that?" "Do what?" Jamie asked, though we all knew exactly what Noah meant. "Stand up to him like that. Weren't you so scared?" Jamie was quiet for a moment, watching other kids play kickball in the distance. "Terrified," he finally admitted. "My legs were shaking so bad I thought I might fall over." "Then, why?" Jamie turned to look directly at Noah. "Because being scared of him is better than being ashamed of myself." He said it so simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I stood there absorbing his words, feeling like I was witnessing something important but not fully understanding what it was yet. "Can I sit with you guys?" I asked, feeling suddenly self-conscious about how I'd never invited either of them to sit with me before. Jamie nodded and moved over, making space. The three of us sat in silence for a while, watching clouds drift overhead. "That photo," I finally said. "How long have you had it?" "Since the second week of school," Jamie replied, after he made Sophia cry for getting too many math problems wrong. I remembered that day. Sophia had been so upset she'd asked to call her mom and go home. "Why didn't you use it then?" Noah asked, his stutter less pronounced now that we were away from the classroom pressure. Jamie shrugged. "It didn't feel right. I was saving it for when it really mattered." Noah's eyes filled with tears again, but different ones this time. "You saved it for me?" Jamie looked embarrassed now. "You're always sharing your math answers with me, and giving me some of your colored pencils when we have art. I wanted to, I don't know, return the favor, I guess." What struck me most in that moment wasn't just Jamie's courage in standing up to Mr. Peterson, but the matter-of-fact way he talked about it afterward. Like defending a friend wasn't extraordinary, it was just what you did. The rest of the day was strange. Mr. Peterson's usual sharp edges seemed dulled. He taught the afternoon lessons without calling on anyone specifically, without his usual sarcastic comments or impatient sighs. When the final bell rang, he didn't immediately retreat to the teacher's lounge as usual, but stood by the door, watching us file out with an unreadable expression. "Jamie," he said quietly as we passed. "A moment, please." Noah and I exchanged worried glances with Jamie. We'll wait for you, I said quickly, surprising myself with the offer. Jamie nodded and stepped back inside the classroom while Noah and I hovered anxiously in the hallway. Do you think he's in trouble? Noah whispered. I shook my head. I don't think so. Did you see Mr. Peterson's face? He looked different. 5 minutes stretched into 10. Other classrooms emptied, the hallway filling, then clearing as kids headed for buses and waiting parents. Noah and I sat on the floor beside the water fountain, our backpacks propped against the wall, neither of us willing to leave without knowing what was happening. Finally, the classroom door opened. Jamie emerged, looking thoughtful, followed by Mr. Peterson, who gave us a brief nod before heading toward the main office. What happened? I asked as soon as Mr. Peterson was out of earshot. Jamie adjusted his backpack. He wanted to tell me about his speech therapy, how he's been working on his stutter since he was our age, how he became a teacher because he had a teacher who made fun of him, and he wanted to be different. But he's not different, I pointed out. He's been awful to everyone, especially Noah. Jamie nodded, his expression serious. I told him that. I said having a hard time yourself doesn't give you permission to make others feel bad. I stared at him amazed. I couldn't imagine saying something like that to an adult, let alone to Mr. Peterson. What did he say? Noah asked. He said I was right, and that he was sorry. Really sorry. Not just saying the words. Jamie paused. He also said he's going to apologize to the whole class tomorrow. We walked home together that afternoon, the three of us taking the long route that passed by the duck pond. It was the first time I'd ever hung out with either Jamie or Noah outside of school. As we walked, they filled me in on things I'd somehow missed despite sitting near them every day, like how Noah was teaching Jamie to play chess using a tiny magnetic travel set, or how Jamie sometimes helped Noah's mom in her garden on weekends in exchange for vegetables his family couldn't afford at the grocery store. My mom always makes too much dinner on Thursdays, I found myself saying. You guys could come over if you want. The invitation hung in the air for a moment before Jamie smiled. That genuine smile that seemed to make his whole face light up. I'd have to ask my dad, but that sounds really nice, he said. That night I told my parents everything that had happened in class. I expected them to be as impressed with Jamie as I was, but my dad's reaction surprised me. That boy has grit, he said, using one of his favorite words. But the real question is, where were you when your classmate was being bullied? His words hit me like a physical blow. You weren't the bully, my mom said gently. But were you a bystander? I didn't have an answer that didn't make me feel ashamed. I'd seen Mr. Peterson pick on Noah and others before. I'd felt bad about it, but I'd never done anything. Not once. Can I invite them both for dinner tomorrow? I asked, changing the subject. My parents exchanged one of those looks they sometimes shared. Of course, my mom said. I'll make extra. I lay awake that night thinking about Jamie standing up in class, about Noah's face when he realized someone was defending him, about Mr. Peterson's unexpected vulnerability. Mostly, though, I thought about myself and all the times I'd seen something wrong and done nothing, all the times I'd chosen comfort over courage. The next morning, there was a different feeling in the air as we filed into Mr. Peterson's classroom. An expectant hush fell as he closed the door behind the last student. Mr. Peterson looked different. Not physically. He still wore his usual pressed shirt and tie, but there was something changed in his posture and his eyes. Before we begin today's lessons, he said, his voice lacking its usual sharp edge, I owe all of you an apology, particularly Noah. Noah's head snapped up, surprise evident on his face. I became a teacher because I wanted to make a difference, Mr. Peterson continued. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what that meant. I forgot that my job isn't just to teach you facts and dates, but to create a space where everyone feels safe to learn and make mistakes. He paused, looking around the room, making brief eye contact with each of us. Yesterday, I was reminded of that by one of your classmates. It took considerable courage for him to speak up, and it shouldn't have been necessary. I should have been better. Mr. Peterson walked over to Noah's desk and placed a hand on the empty chair beside it. Noah, I sincerely apologize for my behavior yesterday and on previous occasions. Your stutter does not define your intelligence or your worth, and I was wrong to suggest otherwise. I, of all people, should have known better. A collective gasp went through the room at this indirect confirmation of what Jamie had revealed. To the rest of the class, I apologize for not creating the supportive environment you all deserve. That will change. starting today. Mr. Peterson returned to the front of the room, straightening his shoulders. Now I think we have some American history to discuss. The class that followed was unlike any we'd had before. Mr. Peterson still demanded attention and participation, but there was a new patience in his approach. When Sophia hesitated over an answer, he waited. When Marcus gave an incorrect date, Mr. Peterson guided him to the right one, rather than dismissing him. And when Noah raised his hand to contribute, something I'd never seen him do voluntarily before, Mr. Peterson called on him immediately and listened fully, without interruption, as Noah worked through his answer at his own pace. At lunch, the three of us sat together at a table near the windows. Other kids kept glancing our way, whispering behind their hands. "You're famous now," I told Jamie, nodding toward the onlookers. Jamie looked uncomfortable. "I don't want to be famous." "Too late," Noah said, smiling slightly. "You're the key kid who stood up to Peterson." "And lived," I added, which made all three of us laugh. "Do you think he meant it?" Noah asked after a while. "The apology?" Jamie considered this. "I think so. People can surprise you sometimes, like you surprised everyone yesterday," I said. Jamie shook his head. "I'm not special. I just did what anyone would do for a friend." But that wasn't true, and we all knew it. Not anyone would have done what Jamie did. I certainly hadn't, though Noah had been my classmate just as long as he'd been Jamie's. After school, Jamie and Noah came to my house for dinner as planned. My mom had made her famous lasagna, and there was garlic bread and a big salad. I watched as both boys took seconds, and how Jamie carefully wrapped the extra piece my mom insisted he take, for later, in a napkin, and tucked it into his backpack. We played video games in the living room afterward, teaching Noah how to use the controller since he'd never had a gaming system at home. For a few hours it was just fun and laughter and the normal stuff of childhood. No classroom drama, no social hierarchies. Just three kids having a good time together. When it was time for them to head home, my dad insisted on driving them. "It's getting dark," he said, grabbing his car keys. "I'll drop you both off." In the car, my dad asked casual questions about school and hobbies, making both boys laugh with his terrible dad jokes. When we pulled up to Noah's house first, a nice two-story in one of the newer developments, Noah hesitated before getting out. "Thanks for dinner," he said. Then, looking directly at Jamie, he added, "And for yesterday. No one's ever stood up for me like that before." Jamie looked embarrassed again. "Anyone would have—" "No," Noah interrupted, suddenly speaking without a stutter. "They wouldn't. You know they wouldn't." After Noah went inside, we drove toward Jamie's neighborhood, a part of town I rarely visited, where the houses were smaller and closer together, many in need of repair. "Turn here," Jamie directed from the back seat. "It's the blue one with the porch light." My dad pulled up in front of a small, somewhat shabby house with peeling paint but a neatly kept yard. Through the front window I could see a man in a wheelchair moving around the kitchen. "That's my dad," Jamie said, following my gaze. "He got hurt at his construction job 3 years ago. That's why he has to work nights cleaning now. It's one of the few jobs he could get after the accident." There was no self-pity in his voice, just a statement of facts. "He sounds like a remarkable man," my dad said. "I'd like to meet him sometime." Jamie smiled. "He'd like that. Thanks for dinner and the ride." As Jamie walked up to his front door, I watched his father's face light up at the sight of his son. The door opened before Jamie could even knock, and I saw them embrace before the door closed behind them. "Dad?" I said as we pulled away. "I think I've been a bystander too long." My father glanced at me in the rearview mirror, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's never too late to change that, you know." The next day at school, something unexpected happened during morning announcements. Principal Wilson's voice came over the speaker system as usual, but what he said caught everyone by surprise. "I'd like to recognize a student who exemplified exceptional character and courage yesterday." Jamie Marshall from Mr. Peterson's 5th grade class stood up for a classmate who was being treated unfairly. It takes great bravery to speak truth to power, and even greater compassion to do so without seeking to embarrass or harm others in the process. Jamie, on behalf of the entire school, thank you for reminding us what true strength looks like. Every head in the classroom turned toward Jamie, who had sunk so low in his seat he was barely visible. His face was bright red, his eyes fixed firmly on his desk. As the announcements continued with the usual lunch menus and club reminders, I saw Mr. Peterson watching Jamie with a thoughtful expression. When the speaker clicked off, he walked over to Jamie's desk. "I hope you don't mind," he said quietly. "I spoke with Principal Wilson yesterday afternoon. I thought your actions deserved recognition." Jamie looked up, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "I wasn't trying to be recognized." "That," Mr. Peterson said, "is precisely why you deserve to be." In the days that followed, our classroom dynamic shifted dramatically. Mr. Peterson wasn't suddenly a perfect teacher. He still had high expectations and could be stern when needed. But the cutting remarks and public humiliations disappeared completely. He began inviting students who were struggling to meet with him during lunch for extra help. And to everyone's surprise, he shared some techniques from his own speech therapy that helped not just Noah, but several other kids who struggled with class participation for various reasons. Noah's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable to witness, with Mr. Peterson no longer singling him out, and with Jamie and me flanking him like unofficial bodyguards. He began to speak up more in class. His stutter didn't disappear. That's not how speech impediments work. But his fear of it did, which made all the difference. 2 weeks after the incident, as everyone had taken to calling it, Mr. Peterson announced a special project. "Instead of our usual history test this month," he said, "we're going to do something different. I want each of you to research and present on an American historical figure who overcame significant obstacles to make a difference." A murmur of interest went through the classroom. Tests were predictable. Projects could be either awesome or awful, depending on the details. "You'll work in pairs," Mr. Peterson continued, "which I'll assign." The murmur turned to groans. Teacher-assigned partners were rarely what you choose yourself. The presentations will be 5 minutes long, and you'll be graded not just on content, but on how well you worked together despite any differences in your working styles or backgrounds. He began reading off pairs of names, and I held my breath, hoping to be matched with either Jamie or Noah. Instead, I heard Noah and Melissa. Melissa was one of the popular girls who rarely spoke to anyone outside her circle. Her father was on the school board, and her designer clothes made my mall-bought outfits look shabby by comparison. I saw her face fall when her name was paired with Noah's, and something hot and angry flared in my chest. Jamie and Christopher. Christopher was our class sports star, already being scouted for elite middle school teams despite only being in 5th grade. He'd never been mean to Jamie, but they existed in completely different social universes. My own partner turned out to be Sophia, the girl who'd cried over math problems earlier in the year. She was nice enough, if extremely shy. After class, I approached Mr. Peterson as other students filed out. "Why did you separate us?" I asked, not even bothering to hide my disappointment. "We work well together." Mr. Peterson set down the papers he'd been gathering. "That's precisely why. You, Jamie, and Noah have formed a strong friendship, which is wonderful. But this project is about building bridges across differences." I wanted to argue but couldn't find the right words. Mr. Peterson seemed to sense my frustration. "Trust me," he said quietly. "Sometimes the most important lessons happen outside our comfort zones." That afternoon, I watched as Christopher approached Jamie at his locker. From a distance, they looked like a physical manifestation of contrast. Christopher tall and athletic in his brand-name clothes. Jamie small and thin in his worn jeans and too large sweater. "So we're partners," Christopher said, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Jamie nodded, looking equally uncomfortable. "Looks like it. I'm not great at history," Christopher admitted, "but I'm good at making posters and stuff. I can help with the research part," Jamie offered, "if you want." They stood there awkwardly for a moment before Christopher said, "Want to come to my house after school to figure out who we're going to do our project on?" Jamie hesitated, and I knew he was thinking about the difference between their homes, wondering what Christopher might think of his small, shabby house with its peeling paint and second-hand furniture. "Or we could use the library," Christopher added quickly, as if sensing Jamie's discomfort. "It's open until 6. "Library works," Jamie agreed, looking relieved. Across the hall, I saw Noah and Melissa having what appeared to be a much more strained conversation. Melissa's body language screamed reluctance, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as Noah spoke. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could read the situation well enough. Unlike Christopher, who seemed genuinely willing to work with Jamie, Melissa clearly viewed being paired with Noah as some kind of punishment. That evening, I called Jamie from my parents' landline phone. "How'd it go with Christopher?" I asked as soon as he picked up. Actually, pretty good, Jamie said, sounding surprised himself. He's not at all what I expected. What do you mean? Well, for one thing, he's really into comic books. Has a whole collection, and he's kind of nervous about his reading level. I think that's why he doesn't like history much. Too many big words. Seriously? Christopher has trouble reading? This was news to me. Christopher had always seemed so confident, so effortlessly good at everything. Don't tell anyone, Jamie said quickly. He was embarrassed about it, but I told him about some tricks my dad taught me for breaking down big words, and we're going to use those for the research. Who are you doing your project on? I asked. Harriet Tubman. Christopher thought she sounded badass. His word, not mine. I laughed, then grew serious again. Noah might have a harder time. Melissa didn't look too happy about working with him. I know, Jamie sighed. He texted me about it. She wanted to do Betsy Ross and he wanted Frederick Douglass. And she said his stutter would ruin the presentation no matter who they chose. My grip tightened on the phone. That's awful. Noah's pretty upset, Jamie agreed. But he said he's not going to back down. After seeing me stand up to Mr. Peterson, he feels like he should stand up for himself too. The next day at lunch, Noah joined us at our usual table, his expression troubled. Melissa wants to do all the talking parts, he said without preamble. She said I can just make the visual aids and stand there while she presents. That's not fair, I protested. It's supposed to be a partnership. Noah poked at his cafeteria pizza. She said no one wants to listen to me, so struggle through every sentence. Jamie set down his sandwich. What did you say to that? I said I've been practicing, Noah replied, a hint of defiance in his voice, and that Frederick Douglass taught himself to read when it was illegal for him to do so. And if he could overcome that, I could overcome speaking in front of class. I stared at Noah, seeing him in a new light. The boy who had once been too afraid to answer questions in class was now standing his ground with one of the most intimidating girls in our grade. What did she say to that? Jamie asked. She kind of blinked a lot, Noah said, the ghost of a smile appearing. Then she said we could maybe split the presentation 50-50. Jamie grinned. Look at you, negotiating like a pro. Over the next 2 weeks, our classroom became a laboratory of unlikely partnerships. Sophia and I chose Eleanor Roosevelt for our project, bonding over her quote about doing one thing every day that scares you, something Sophia was living by, simply speaking in front of the class. Christopher and Jamie were often spotted in the library together, heads bent over history books, occasionally bursting into muffled laughter over something one of them had said. I'd never seen Jamie so animated around anyone outside our small circle. Most surprising was the gradual thaw between Noah and Melissa. After their rocky start, something shifted. I first noticed it when Melissa defended Noah in the lunch line when some 6th grader made a comment about his stutter. Then I saw them sitting together in the library, Melissa patiently listening as Noah practiced his portion of their presentation, offering suggestions but never taking over. The day of the presentations arrived, and the classroom hummed with nervous energy. Mr. Peterson had arranged our desks in a semicircle facing the front of the room, where each pair would present. Remember, he said as we settled in, these presentations aren't just about historical facts. They're about what these figures can teach us about courage, perseverance, and standing up for what's right. Sophia and I went third. I handled most of the talking while Sophia managed our visual aids, a compromise that played to both our strengths. When we finished to polite applause, I felt Mr. Peterson's approving nod like a physical touch. Christopher and Jamie presented after us. Christopher began by introducing Harriet Tubman with confidence, but when he reached a particularly difficult passage about the Fugitive Slave Act, he stumbled over several of the longer words. I saw a flash of panic cross his face, his confident facade momentarily cracking. Before Mr. Peterson could intervene, Jamie stepped closer to him, subtly pointing to different parts of the words on their poster, whispering something that only Christopher could hear. Christopher took a deep breath, broke the word down, and continued, shooting Jamie a grateful look. Their presentation was seamless after that, Christopher handling the big-picture narrative while Jamie filled in the historical details, each complementing the other's strengths. But it was Noah and Melissa's presentation that left the classroom silent afterward. They'd chosen Frederick Douglass, as Noah had wanted. Melissa began by introducing the famous abolitionist, her usual confidence on full display. Then, to everyone's surprise, she deliberately stumbled over a sentence. "Excuse me," she said, looking directly at the class. That was difficult to read, wasn't it? Frederick Douglass faced challenges much greater than tripping over words when he taught himself to read despite laws forbidding it. "Now my partner will tell you about how Douglass escaped slavery." She stepped aside, giving Noah center stage. Noah stepped forward, note cards in hand, clearly nervous but determined. Frederick Douglass believed that education was the path to freedom, he began. His stutter was present, but he didn't try to rush through it or apologize for it. He simply took his time, giving each word the space it needed. As Noah spoke, something remarkable happened. Instead of fidgeting or looking embarrassed for him, the class leaned forward, listening intently. When he finished his portion without rushing or skipping anything, the applause was immediate and genuine. Melissa beamed at him as they completed their presentation together. "Mr. Peterson stood up after the last pair had finished. "I want to thank everyone for their hard work," he said. "I saw real partnerships form over these past weeks. Students supporting each other, learning from each other, and helping each other overcome challenges." He paused, looking around the room at all of us. "When I assigned this project, I hoped you would learn about historical figures who overcame obstacles. What I didn't anticipate was how many of you would become those figures for each other." After class, Mr. Peterson asked Jamie, Noah, and me to stay behind for a moment. "I wanted to thank you three," he said once the room had emptied. "For what?" Jamie asked. "For teaching me something I should have already known." Mr. Peterson leaned against his desk. "When I was your age, I had a teacher who made my life miserable because of my stutter. I promised myself I'd never be like him. Yet somehow over the years I became exactly what I hated." He looked at each of us in turn. "Jamie, your courage that day didn't just help Noah. It helped me remember who I wanted to be. And you two," he nodded at Noah and me, "your willingness to form new friendships and build bridges has changed this classroom in ways I never could have." It was strange hearing a teacher speak to us this way, like we were people who had something valuable to offer, not just kids to be instructed. "The three of you remind me of a quote by Margaret Mead," Mr. Peterson continued. "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." As we left the classroom, Noah turned to Jamie. "You know what's weird? Melissa invited me to her birthday party next weekend." Jamie's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously?" Noah nodded. "She said her dad was really impressed by our presentation, and she told him about how I stuck up for myself when she tried to take over the project." "That's amazing," I said. "Are you going to go?" "I think so," Noah replied. "She's actually not as scary once you get to know her." "That seems to be the theme lately," Jamie said with a smile. By the time Christmas break arrived, our classroom felt like a different place entirely. The rigid social boundaries hadn't disappeared completely. That would be too much to expect. But they had become more permeable. Christopher often joined us for lunch, bringing his comic books to show Jamie. Melissa and Noah had formed an unlikely friendship based on their shared interest in debate club, which Noah had joined despite his stutter, or perhaps because of it, as a way to face his fear head-on. As for Mr. Peterson, he remained strict about schoolwork and classroom behavior, but there was a warmth to his strictness now, an understanding that high standards and compassion could coexist. On the last day before break, he handed out our report cards personally, adding a brief comment to each student as he did. "Jamie," he said quietly when it was Jamie's turn, "your father should be very proud of the young man you're becoming." Jamie ducked his head, but not before I caught the pleased flush on his face. That afternoon, as we cleaned out our desks for the break, Mr. Peterson called for our attention one last time. "I have a small announcement before you go," he said. "Starting in January, our school will be offering free speech therapy sessions after class for any student who wants them. Principal Wilson approved the program yesterday." His eyes found Noah's across the room. "The sessions are entirely voluntary, and they're not just for students with obvious speech difficulties. Anyone who wants to become a more confident public speaker is welcome." Later, as we walked home through the snow-dusted streets, Jamie, Noah, and I speculated about whether Mr. Peterson himself would be involved in the new speech therapy program. "He'd be good at it," Noah said thoughtfully. "He knows what it's like." "That's what makes a good teacher, I think," Jamie replied. "Not just knowing the subject, but knowing what it feels like to struggle with it." I thought about my own struggles, not with speech, but with finding the courage to stand up when something wasn't right, about how watching Jamie that day had changed something fundamental in me. Do you ever think about how different things would be if you hadn't stood up that day? I asked Jamie suddenly. He considered this, breath fogging in the cold air. I try not to. It wasn't some big heroic decision, you know. I was just really angry. But you didn't show it like that, Noah pointed out. You didn't yell or make him feel bad. You just stood your ground. Jamie kicked at a clump of snow. My dad always says there's a difference between being tough and being strong. Tough is about how you make others feel. Intimidated, scared. Strong is about how you hold yourself when things are hard. We walked in silence for a while, our footprints marking our path through the fresh snow. I got something for both of you, Jamie said suddenly, stopping to dig in his backpack. It's not much. He pulled out 2 small, clumsily wrapped packages and handed one to each of us. You didn't have to, I began, but he shook his head. I wanted to. Just open them. Inside mine was a small, handmade bookmark. Pressed between layers of laminated paper was a perfect maple leaf, its autumn colors preserved. Noah's was similar, but with an oak leaf. I collected them back in October, Jamie explained, looking embarrassed now. My dad helped me press and laminate them. He said friendships are like leaves, no two are exactly alike, and the best ones change colors together but don't fall apart. I felt a lump form in my throat. Such a simple gift, yet so thoughtful. Thank you, I said, carefully sliding the bookmark into my math textbook. Noah, who was usually so anxious about saying the right thing, simply pulled Jamie into a hug. The snow began falling more heavily as we continued our walk, fat flakes catching on our hats and eyelashes. We passed the duck pond, now frozen over, where a few younger kids were sliding around in their boots under parental supervision. We waved to Mr. Peterson, who was helping his elderly neighbor shovel her walkway. He straightened and waved back, a genuine smile crossing his face. It's strange how life pivots on small moments. If Jamie hadn't stood up that day, would Noah still stutter every time he spoke? Would Mr. Peterson still be the teacher everyone feared? Would I still be the kind of person who watches injustice and does nothing? I can't know for sure, but I do know this. Courage isn't about grand gestures or dramatic stands. Sometimes it's as simple as a boy in worn-out clothes saying no when it would be easier to stay silent. Sometimes it's about defending a friend even when your voice shakes. And sometimes it's about the chain reaction that follows, how one small act of bravery can ripple outward, changing not just a classroom but the people within it, one conversation at a time. As Jamie turned to head down his street, I called after him. See you tomorrow? My mom said you can both come over to make cookies. He grinned, snowflakes melting on his eyelashes. Wouldn't miss it. Watching him walk toward his small blue house, I made a silent promise to myself. From now on, I would be the kind of friend worth having a leaf preserved for. The kind who stands up, speaks out, builds bridges. The kind who recognizes that courage, like kindness, is contagious, and that sometimes the quietest voices have the most important things to say. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and comment below which part moved you the most. And before you go, there's a recommended video right here that will give you goosebumps. Watch it now. Which part of this story resonated with you most? Have you ever witnessed someone standing up for what's right when it would have been easier to stay silent?